So take it away, Doug.
Thanks, Paul. Well, right off the bat, I cannot wait. As the crawl at the bottom of the screen will show you, I got a new book. It's Nomad Moon. Get it from the usual suspects, including Gloria Mindak, Servina Barva Press, or me. So let me read a couple of things from this and go from there. After an alarming number of rapid, twitchy side-to-side glances, Isabella spoke. "This is such an inky story," she nervously whispered, switching personas. It was only then that I noticed that somehow she had enameled playing cards on all of her teeth, spades on the top and hearts on the bottom. Okay, that sets the tone, and now we can move along. I saw the Muse last night in a 24-hour corner store. Oh, she just looked like shit. She was buying cigarettes and Slim Jims, and I was getting cat food in a Slurpee. Poor thing. She had an old bathrobe on over her house coat, a bomber hat with ear flaps, and men's shoes. Now, the kid behind the counter, he told her she couldn't smoke in the store. And I said something. I said, "Don't say that," or "Leave her the fuck alone," or "She's all right," or something. I don't know, but I said something. Well, she ground it out on the linoleum and paid. And on her way out, she touched my arm and whispered, "I haven't forgotten you, Bunny." So the Muse is always with us. All right. This is something else. Saturday, I dropped a jar of pickles in the dollar store. Breakage and aisle, whatever. Now, the high school girl at the register, no, she was really nice about it. She smiled and she told me, "Oh, old people drop shit all the time." Well, to make up for the mess, I bought 3 more jars. Quickly summoned, a young lout carried them out to my car to ensure I didn't drop these too, I guess. You know, and I wanted to tip him, but I only had a 20. So I shook his big doughy hand instead. The boy looked at me like I was a man from fucking Mars. Okay. We'll venture outward. Doorbell. She couldn't tell, honestly couldn't, if it was Carl or Bernice who came to her door and asked to borrow a cup of spit. They were spirit people. Look, it's not nice to say ghosts. They were spirit people and new to the neighborhood. She told whoever it was to come back later, maybe after dinner, and she promised to work on filling a cup. But now she had her doubts. What did they need it for? And borrow? Borrow as in bring one back to replace the first? She didn't want anything back, not even the cup. What could they need it for? Why couldn't they use their own? Maybe spirit people don't salivate. Maybe they do. Who knows? Oh, just give it to them. Say it's a welcome to your afterlife and our neighborhood gift. But then Bernice or Carl or whoever might feel obligated to give her something. Well, it would have to be better than a cup of spit, wouldn't it? Maybe some unwanted swag bag, bon voyage pre-death memento. Something nice. Well, as long as it wasn't alive, because God knows the cat is more than enough to deal with. Okay, well, out of the bardo. back to home. This is from when I used to publish stuff on postcards. I had a pain in the neck, but I'm going to do it again. It's a different imprint. It's called Woodlot. I'm going to have this back in December to do something else. All right. I recognized her easy enough, even without the rodeo number pinned to her back. Would have stopped no matter when I saw the old truck with the hood up. Well, we both smiled when it was an easy fix. And then it came to me. That farm girl knew how to fix the damn thing herself. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your hospitality. Follow this crawl on the bottom for buying my book.
Hold it up so we could see it.
Okay. Here's the book. There's me on the back. Gloria Mindak published it. Give her a thrill and buy one from her. Not a big deal. 24 stories. Supposed to be out before COVID. Didn't make it out until this July. But out it is. It's on the loose.
And I've read it and enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Nancy Ludmer. Her fiction appears in Kenyon Review, Electric Literature, Jellyfish Review, and many other magazines. Her stories in River Styx and Streetlight were selected for Best Small Fictions in 2016, 2022. Most recently, her story, The Loneliness Cure, won Orion Books' Best Spiritual Literature Prize for Fiction and will appear in the Best Spiritual Literature 2022 anthology. Her first story collection, Mostly Flash, will be published in October of this year by Snake Nation Press, where it won the 2022 Serena McDonald Kennedy Prize. Nancy, you're up.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that introduction. I'm going to read just one story from the collection. It actually has 48 stories. Some of them are just a page long or 150 words long. But of the 48 stories, a bunch of them are about 1,000 words and a few are longer. So this one, I am grateful to David Bright. He gave it a prize. He published it in Gemini. I don't believe I've ever read it before. So I'm delighted to read it to you. It's called 13 Tips for Photographing Your Nephew's Bar Mitzvah When You Still Can't Forgive Your Brother-in-Law. So I'll start with the first tip. Tip 1, secure your gear. Shalom, welcome to B'nai Chaim. The ponytail teenage usher asked you to leave your camera bag in the cloakroom. Photography is forbidden during the service. You promise to hide it under your seat, but explain you can't risk losing it. She frowns. Who would steal a camera during a bar mitzvah? Still, she relents. Tip 2, prepare for the unexpected. Why did Harry and Sarit turn to you when their professional photographer bailed? You didn't even own a camera until yesterday, a point and shoot from B&H, fully refundable. You're pondering this question while the rabbi speaks about punishment and forgiveness in Adam's Torah portion. Do the sinning Israelites have a future? Harry and Sarit sit on velvet upholstered chairs flanking the rabbi. Adam beams in his blue suit. His 7-year-old twin brothers disrupt the first row, mugging, chatting, ignoring the shushing. They are your secret loves. 3, capture memories as well as moments. Your sister claims Harry said you were a true memoirist, the best photographer in the family. Really? You haven't photographed him in 16 years. Blurred black and whites, an antique Polaroid. Then again, Harry's standards were always low. His murmured, "On your knees, darling." You push away these thoughts. The reason you see your family only once a year. Tip 4, consider a collage using old photos. 16 years ago, late afternoon, the sun-dappled foyer of your parents' house in Philly. You and Harry have driven from Ithaca. Everyone assumes you connected on Cornell's ride board. Meeting your beautiful older sister, Sarit, Harry comments what good company you were on the 5-hour trip. The months you spent together, the handsome grad student teaching the avid freshman to fillet him just so, your post-coital bodies braided like warm challah, fragrant and glistening with moisture. Good company. Tip 5, anticipate the weather. Outside the shul, thick alabaster clouds, no trace of blue. With an opaque white sky as backdrop, everything increases in intensity. Colors flame, emotions flare, rain threatens. 6, remember to tell a story. 16 years ago, leaving the clinic, you focused on a whited out sky, skirting the kneeling women praying for your salvation, taunting, "Boy or girl, mama?" At 17, you believed the time would come when you would no longer recall that day, much less the softly falling, unforgiving snow. Tip 7, the rule of thirds. Avoid the bullseye. At the outdoor buffet, you wolf down francs and blankets, perhaps your only chance. You circle the tent. Adam, flanked by grandmas, lighting a candle. Check. Grandpas, hands joined over the challah. Check. Adam, Harry, and Sarit hoisted in chairs, requiring several takes because you keep chopping off Harry's head. Check. Adam and the twins. Where are the twins? Tip 8, don't leave anyone out. At the kids' table, 12-year-old girls with half-purpled hair vamp in tiny dresses. Adam and his best buds play poker, smears of mustard, chocolate, grandma's lipstick. You snack them all. You ask Adam if he's seen Josh and Jake. Sorry, Aunt Leah, silently begging, please don't make me go find them. At the old people's table, everyone smiles, coffee cups aloft, sweet and low packets ripped open or secured in handbags against future bitterness. Your grandma, the prettiest of them all, with the bluest eyes, inherited by Sarit and Adam, points to the house. Harry is punishing them. Tip 9, let family squabbles run their course. Here you must disagree. Away from the music and tumult, the house is quiet, except for Jake. How long has he been crying? An hour? 2? You wrap him in your arms, tell him you love him, that he is the best boy in the world. One day he will know that. You speak to him, but also to the one who isn't there. The boy you sometimes think about, although you never confirmed it was a boy. Eventually, Jake relaxes, calms in your arms. Josh, pretending nonchalance, looks up from the latest red wall. For weeks they've heard about the candle lighting, the chairs, the cake. What about their memories? You feel bad for the boys having Harry for a dad. Tip 10, be bold, go for the shots you want. You hold out your empty hands, the camera dangling from your neck. I'm sure there's chocolate cake left, you tell them. Their dark curls are askew, their skinny arms fragile in white, short-sleeved dress shirts. Josh murmurs, but Dad said, you tell them not to worry about Harry. Outside, the music has died, except for a mournful sax playing Unforgettable. They race to the empty seats at your grandma's table. She looks at you and understands, not all of it, but enough. Tip 11, change your perspective. The light has changed, the clouds shifted. A glimmer of rainbow on the horizon suggests it rained nearby. You change the setting on the camera the way the B&H guy showed you. Where were you, Leah? Sarah asks. She hasn't noticed the twins, not yet. She is not a noticer, your sister. The Miller's table hasn't been photographed. People are starting to leave. She hesitates. Thank you for all this. Harry and I owe you big time. You tell her, no problem. You tell her you're on it. You don't say, you're welcome. Tip 12, images, even mistakes, can be manipulated. Because you are the photographer, there will be no pictures of you. Is a future even possible in which you reclaim your position in the family, or at least a position, go from being Aunt Leah on Thanksgiving to something else, help the boys flout their father's edicts, their mother's cluelessness. And then what? 13, take a deep breath. You're getting all the tables. The last dance, when you know he's there, Harry standing behind you. You don't have to turn and look. It's his smell, Dial soap and Balkan Sobrani, and his sweet, dark, messy hair, which he is lucky at 41 to have in abundance. He is lucky, and you say a prayer, your first real prayer of the day, that his boys end up lucky too.
Love it, Nancy.
Thanks. Thank you.
That was excellent. Did you turn the phone off?
Phil Temples is our next reader. He's still trying to make sense of it all. Writing and photography help. He can be followed at https://temples.com or on Twitter at Phil Temple. At Phil Temple, you're up.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to read a short story, flash story called Scruffy. I steer my small skiff down Charles Lane, past Beaumont Street. I'm accompanied by a small, scrawny dog who is half standing, half sitting in the bow of the boat. He's very lethargic, probably exhausted. He looks back at me with vacant eyes and a defeated expression. I call him Scruffy. I plucked Scruffy out of the brownish, contaminated water about a quarter of a mile back near Shawnee and Pine. Scruffy stares ahead at the watery muck. Then he scampers to the back of the boat to join me. He licks my hand. I suppose he's showing his appreciation to me for saving his life. He smells terribly and needs a bath. So do I. I've been cruising around for almost 3 hours, looking for anyone left to rescue in this small town. 2 or 3 other boaters have crossed my path today, also looking for survivors. The entire neighborhood has the stench of sewage. It's been covered under 5 feet of water for the past 3 days. Most folks who wanted to get have already gotten. but the little armada to which I belong wants to make sure no one gets left behind. I hit my little air horn and sent out a blast of noise in case anyone is within earshot. Almost immediately, I hear a faint cry from the house across the street. I think it comes from an upstairs window. Hey. Hello, anybody there? I yell. Up here, up here. It's a woman's voice. It starts out strong, then it tapers off as though the person is bone tired and spent. Okay, hang on, I'm coming. I maneuver over near the front door and reach out to the doorknob. At first, I can't tell if the door is locked or jammed. I give it a big tug and almost fall back into the boat as the door moves only an inch. In the process, I manage to scrape my arm on the side of the skiff. Damn. I get out some bottled water and rinse off the cut. Scruffy comes up and tries to lick it, but I brush him away. No, Scruffy, stay. Cuts exposed to this filthy water can be quite dangerous. I apply some Neosporin and a bandage. Ma'am, can you hear me? What's your name? Are you hurt? After a moment, I hear, Ida Mae Hansen. I'm okay, I think. Well, Ida Mae, I got a boat down here to take you to safety. Is there a back door or a window you can get out of? Round the side of the house, maybe? I fire up the outboard and maneuver through the front yard to the right side. Sure enough, there's a living room window that appears to be about the right height for me to pull up to. Some human excrement floats by. I try not to look at it. I don't want to add my vomit to the already disgusting mix. Through the window, I see a frail elderly woman come down the stairs. She's holding onto the railing. She hesitates for a second before stepping into the water in her living room. It's higher than her waist. She wades over to the window. Can you open the door, Ida Mae? I don't rightly know. I'll try. Ida Mae attempts to pull up the heavy wooden portion of the double-hung window, but she lacks the body strength to pull it. She stares blankly at me through the window. I'm going to have to break it open. Stand back so you don't get hit with any flying glass. She wades over to the other side of the room while I grab an axe. I heave the axe head through the glass and run it around the edges to clear out the remaining fragments. It makes a horrible racket. Okay, Ida Mae, all set. Just then, a cottonmouth falls off of a nearby tree branch into the boat. It lands 3 feet from me. Scruffy is beside himself. He looks like he's about to jump out of the boat. The snake doesn't look too happy either. I feel sorry for the critter. He's trying to survive like everything else out here. But he picked the wrong boat in which to hitch a ride. Scruffy, stay. I carefully poke the axe head toward the snake. He strikes at it. After a few attempts, I'm able to pin his head against the axe and the side of the boat, and I apply deadly pressure. After a moment, I snuff the life out of him. I pick up the carcass and fling it about 10 feet into the water. It hits with a splash. Scruffy looks calmer. He goes back to the bow and lies down. Okay, let's try that again, Ida Mae. It's tricky helping the old woman out the window while keeping the boat stationary. I finally manage to grab her waist and haul her in. I slip and both of us fall into the bottom of the boat with her on top of me. Goodness, I'm sorry. I'm guessing it's the most intimate contact she's ever had with a black man. Don't worry about it, ma'am. Just glad you're okay. I'm Josh. I nod at the mutt. This here's Scruffy. The dog comes up and licks her arm. You live here by yourself? No, she replies. My son Harold lived here, but he up and left me a couple of days ago. He waited out the front door when the water was only knee-high. Told me, you're on your own. Well, you're safe now, both you and Scruffy. I fire up the outboard, set a course down the street for the edge of town and higher ground. What kind of a bastard would do that to his mother? Thank you.
Really good, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you.
And kudos to Scruffy. Our next reader is Sandra Arnold. She's an award-winning writer who lives in New Zealand. She's the author of 5 books, including The Ash, the Well, and the Bluebell, the Carroll Press, New Zealand, Soul Etchings, Retreat West Books, UK, and Sing No Sad Song, Canterbury University Press, NZ. Her short fiction has been widely published and anthologized internationally. She has received nominations for the Best Small Fictions, Best Microfictions, and the Pushcart Prize. She has a PhD in creative writing from Central Queensland University in Australia. Sandra.
Thank you, Paul. The first story I'll read is called Future Proof, and it was published recently in Pure Slush, an anthology from Australia, with the theme of the anthology was marriage. Future Proof. Barney was enthusing about inviting relevant people to their wedding. Relevant to his career, he emphasized, future-proofing. But Fleur's attention was focused on a young couple sitting in a far corner of the restaurant. She'd never seen them before, but she knew the man's name was Toss Bulwark, and that he would go home that night and strangle the woman who was now sitting beside him. This woman, she knew, had stuck pictures of rotting gums on her child's bedroom wall to ensure the girl never forgot to clean her teeth. The child, Fleur understood, was called Willow, and she knew Willow felt safe only after dark. Then she opened her bedroom window and jumped out into the garden. She climbed into a tree every night and sat beside an owl. "Have you been listening to a single word I've said?" demanded Barney. "Oh, of course," Fleur smiled. "Wedding invitations, relevant people." After Barney's outburst, she determined to close the door on all revelations about the lives of other people. Not that she had much control over them, coming unbidden as they did. Such insights had unnerved her as a child and unnerved her now. She was marrying Barney not because she loved him, but because she believed his pragmatism would future-proof their life together. After they were married, they moved into the house Barney had bought for them, a large brick villa with extensive lawns in a posh suburb in the city. On their first day there, Fleur dreamed of dogs and children charging over the grass on days bright with sunshine. She wandered over to a flower bed and watched a bee wiggle its way inside a foxglove. "Oh, I love to watch their fat bottoms wriggle and to listen to the way their drone turns to a high-pitched sound. Once they're inside," she said, turning to Barney. But he was too busy fretting over the weeds in the lawn to listen. He stabbed out a number on his mobile to summon a contractor. In the following years, Barney trained the dog and the 3 children to stay off the grass and keep to the concrete paths. He walked along the edges every evening, looking for worm casts and calling contractors to deal with any he found. Other than that, he admired the perfectly manicured emerald green lawns from a window. While he was away on a business trip, Fleur arranged a birthday party for 5-year-old Daisy. She took a video of the 20 invited children dancing on the grass and throwing sticks for Harvey, the dog. As she watched them running about, Fleur flipped without warning to that place where she knew 3-year-old Emma would die in a car accident in 15 years' time. Daisy, 5, would have a disastrous marriage. Fabian, 7, would be bullied all through school and in the workplace. Before she slammed that door shut, she knew that Toss Bulwark would be released from prison on parole. Barney died of a heart attack at the age of 60. The lawyer told Fleur he'd left the house to their 2 surviving children, who now lived in another country. She didn't mind. She'd moved out of the house the day he'd gone ballistic at the state of the lawns after Daisy's birthday party, which included screaming at Fleur, smacking the children, and taking Harvey to the vet to be euthanized. For the past 3 decades, Fleur had lived in a tiny cottage with an untidy garden full of foxgloves and bees and dogs she'd rescued from the pound, who chased each other in wild circles on the grass. Barney, with the help of his lawyer friends, had won custody of the children and allowed them to visit her only once a month. After the will was read, Fabian and Daisy sold the house to developers after telling their mother by phone that they never wanted to see the place again. A few weeks after the sale, Fleur drove to the city, parked her car, and watched as bulldozers smashed the house and left deep, muddy tire tracks in the churned up garden. She paid one more visit 6 months later to look at the 7 new townhouses with tiled courtyards crammed together on the grounds, and noted that there was not one blade of grass to be seen. She was glad that no children would grow up at these townhouses. As she turned away, she saw the notice on the gates, Toss Bulwark Builders. She wasn't surprised. Very little surprised her these days. She reflected briefly that she could have warned Barney about the heart attack. She shrugged and walked away. That's it.
Thank you, Sandra.
And the next one is called Prudence Personified. This one was published in Fictive Dream. Prue had been self-isolating at home for a couple of months because of the Omicron outbreak in the city. Today, triple vaxxed, she set off on the 60K journey for her appointment. But every road she drove down was closed or undergoing repairs. New drains, new gutters, diversion signs, ubiquitous orange road cones, endless delays. The anti-vax protests in the city centre, tattooed people in tinfoil hats holding signs about secret government raids. Some were holding up placards with pictures of war criminals hanging from a scaffold. Prue shivered as she crawled along in the line of traffic. When she finally arrived in the ear clinic, 40 minutes late for her hearing test, the receptionist told her she needed to make another appointment. "Not my fault," said Prue, "roadworks." The receptionist glanced at her above her glasses. "You should have planned for that, Miss Personified. Your appointment time has lapsed. The next space we have in 6 weeks. But I live 60K out of town. I filled in a new time for you. 6 weeks. Here's your appointment card." Next stop was the hospital for the annual check on her pacemaker. On the door, along with all the usual COVID warning signs, was a new notice. If you have any symptoms of illness during your appointment, you will be asked to leave. She sat in the waiting room with seats placed 1 meter apart, a game show blaring from the television. Several enormously obese people staggered past, sat down and stared at their phones. On the way home, she stopped at the supermarket to pick up sugar crystals. The sugar shelves were bare. "COVID," shrugged the assistant. Back in the car, she switched on the radio and listened to an update on the fighting in Ukraine and wept at the account of homeless people and dead children. At her garden gate, her dog bounded up, tail revolving with joy. She made a cup of sugarless coffee, saving the last crystals in the jar, and sat in the garden with the dog wrapped around her feet. She heard her neighbor, Eelco, muttering in his garden, So she got up and leaned over the fence. He was arranging pine cones in straight lines around the border of his lawn. She waved to catch his attention, and when he looked up, she asked if he'd like to come over for a cup of coffee. He blinked and nodded. She pointed to the row of pine cones and asked what he was doing. "Well, no point in planting flowers anymore, is there?" he said. She made his coffee hot, strong, and black, the way she knew he loved it, and heaped in the last of her sugar crystals. As she carried the tray outside, she saw Ilko bending over Marigold, peering at a bee. She set down the tray and handed him his cup. She watched his face soften when he took his first sip. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thanks.
Next up is Tony Press. He loves living in a tiny town that actually borders San Francisco. He loves Oaxaca in Mexico and Bristol in England. His story collection, Crossing the Lines, is still available for purchase. Direct from him is his favorite method, but there are other ways too. Tony Press.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. I'm going to offer two short ones. Since the first story today, I think took a fair amount of time in a train station in New York. So this all fits in, I think. First one is called Penn Station Sunday. And there will be two stories. Penn Station Sunday. Henry walked the 40 minutes from his family's apartment on 72nd Street, the September morning already muggy and warm, entering Penn Station at 7:30 on the dot. It was bustling. When was it not? But because it was Sunday, it was both bustling and calm, if that were possible. He lived in New York his entire life, all 19 years, had even worked right here for 2 summers, selling magazines, newspapers, cigars, cigarettes, gum, so many packs of gum from Jimmy Vincenzo's booth. That was a good job. His next job, he was not so sure about. He was taking the 1040 to Pittsburgh, transferring to another line, then another, to end up in Texas in a couple of days. Today was Sunday, yes, but tomorrow was Monday, and on Thursday he was reporting for duty at Camp Maxey, near a city called Paris, which made no sense at all. Wherever it was, he'd be lugging his bag the whole route. Upon arrival, he'd be issued a new set of clothes, government issue, army green. He bought a daily news from someone at Jimmy's booth, someone he'd never met before, grabbed a coffee from another vendor, and found a spot on a bench with a direct view of the massive clock. He had 2+ hours to wait, but he was fine with that. He believed in arriving early. More, he wanted one last Penn Station immersion. When would he be here again? And where else, he wondered, did he feel so at home? Certainly not at home, despite the best efforts of his mother, stepfather, little sisters. There was nothing horrible about any of those people, but God, that apartment was small. It was like it had hands that too often clutched his neck. Yes, an exaggeration, but it was damn hard to breathe there. And there was one more reason to be here this early, in this spot. Call it hope. Better call it by its true name, Sheila. Sheila, whom he'd met only 2 weeks ago at a CYO dance way out in Brooklyn. Sheila, who had moved from Kentucky to New York only 6 months earlier. Sheila, who had kissed him that night on the R train back to Manhattan, and who had kissed him on 3 separate nights since then. She did the paperwork for her uncle's plumbing supply company in the Bronx, lived with a cousin in Lower Manhattan, took care of the cousin's kid pretty much every hour she wasn't on the job. It was her first dance since leaving Louisville. He'd gone with 2 buddies, a spur-of-the-moment decision by the 3 of them, each a recent high school graduate. Class of 42, that's who. The other two guys were shipping out next week, Merchant Marine. The Kiss is on the R train. The Kiss is the following Tuesday and Sunday and Tuesday of this week. And now it was Sunday again. She knew he was leaving. He told her that first night, a few minutes before they reached Canal Street, her stop. He couldn't not tell her. The look on her face, the moment she understood what he was saying, whatever else happened in his life, that look he would never forget. He sipped his coffee, regretting the lack of cream. He opened the door to the sports. The Yanks lost yesterday, but he knew that, and they'd already locked up the pennant. The series was starting on Wednesday. He closed the paper, set it down, stood, stretched, and sat down again. A group of 15, maybe 20 people, all dressed formally, crossed in front of him, following a guy holding a sign above his head, a sign that said something Henry had missed, probably heading for the stairs. He got up, walked 10 steps to the trash bin, tossed his empty cup. He returned, opened the paper to the crossword, pulled a pen from his pocket, stared at the puzzle for a minute, but did not begin. He closed his eyes, pen still in hand. When he opened them, Sheila was standing 5 feet away, wearing the same green dress she'd worn in Brooklyn. Little white flowers danced on the shoulders. She was smiling. He didn't know if his own face was smiling or crying or both. And then he saw, on the scuffed floor beside her, amid cigarette butts and crumpled napkins, the most beautiful sight of his life, a red, tiny Samsonite suitcase. And the second one is called At the Station, different station. At the station. He sat directly across from me, though the Cordoba station waiting area was packed with a dozen rows of unoccupied benches. I had 16 minutes before it was my turn to pass through the sliding glass doors and onto the platform, doors guarded by serious men with rifles, doors that separated those who waited from those who actually went somewhere. Next to me, my duffel. Next to him, nothing. Traveling light, or he was meeting someone. Either was possible. Not everyone was as restless as I. The message board flashed arrivals, mostly from Sevilla. One in 4 minutes, another in 16, a third in half an hour. And from Madrid, 8 minutes. Over the top of me, periodico, I caught the man's eyes, or rather I stared head on into his eyes. But though his eyes were equally locked on mine, they shared nothing, no sign of connection. Was he blind? Ciega, blind, a word I'd recently learned. I glanced away, but curiosity conquered shame, and I looked again, this time less directly. His skin told tales I couldn't read. I guessed he'd been a child in the Civil War, perhaps a child soldier. The doors opened just enough and a throng poured through, the gap so narrow each person had to walk single file. He turned his body and I watched as he scrutinized each Sevilla arriving passenger. Not blind then and not going anywhere. Then I saw it. He pulled a black and white photo from a jacket pocket, 3x5 or its Spanish equivalent, and he held it almost at arm's length. My opinion of his vision clouded again. Because he shifted position, I easily saw the photo, perhaps better than he could. The two figures in it could have been, but weren't, Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin 50 years back, so swaggering their stance, their fearless grins bursting with life, virility. One's hand was on the other's shoulder, and the posture boasted of primacy and the unquestioned glory of youth. He studied it, put it back in his pocket, lit a cigarette, but immediately pinched it cold. 3 minutes, the photo was out again, studied again, another train, another burst of people. He stared at each, but found no one. Is today the day? He got up, walked just outside the door, and relit his cigarette. The next Sevilla train was 15 minutes away. He puffed rapidly, was back in 2 minutes, a faithful dog at his window. Again, he consulted the photo. My train was announced, arrived, and left for Madrid without me. There'll be another. The afternoon would be spent watching the man watch the arrivals and checking the photo and remembering, both of us, those moments that would live now only in our memories, our pockets, and in our bordered photographs. They stare back at us, challenge us, demand we seek vision, we once held. Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Tony. Cindy Rasmus is a Jersey girl who looks like a mob wife and talks like anybody's from West Side Story. Her noir, horror, bizarro stories have been published in the coolest places, such as Shotgun Honey Magazine, the Rye Whiskey Review, the Raw Art Review, Under the Bleachers, and Rock and Hard Place. She's the editor / art director of Yellow Mama and the art director of Black Petals. She's published 7 collections of short stories. And she's also a Gemini, a Christian, and an animal rights advocate. Cindy.
Thanks, Paul. I want to read the closing story from my collection backwards, my latest one about growing up Catholic and weird in the 60s. But this story takes place in 1970. It's the last one. And it's pretty, I don't know. There's a reason I closed with it. It's called Here Comes the Sun. 1970. Where you going? Mary's mom whined. The girl stiffened. Nowhere. Mary wiped her sweaty face. Noreen and Greta dug bare toes in the sand as Dizzy Deb said, just to the boardwalk for ice cream. That blew it. Either Mary's mom would stop them from going or want something herself. Mary bet she'd want hot coffee. She would burn herself carrying it back. You leaving me all alone? Mary's heart sank. As usual, she would get stuck behind. So far, this day trip stunk. It was super hot. She got sand in her bathing suit. If she scratched her crotch, Itchy would be her new nickname. Worse, it wasn't even her bathing suit. Once her mom's, that it got stretched out enough to fit over Mary's lard ass. She wished one of her friends' moms had come instead. Greta's or Noreen's would be under an umbrella, eyes glued to a book. Dizzy Deb's mom would be on that bar at that bar on the boardwalk, with her cat sunglasses and gray hair peeping out of the jeweled turban. Mary's mom was a joke. Cigarette after cigarette she smoked, and the smoke went right up their noses. Each time Noreen coughed, Mary's mom looked the other way. You want something? Dizzy Deb said reluctantly. Coffee, Mary's mom said. Extra light with sweet and low. Once they were gone, she said, look at you with sand all over you. When Mary brushed off the sand, she heard, that suit looked better on me. You're too fat for red and white. Like she was back at school, Mary's lip quivered. Sometimes her mom was as mean as her St. Jude's classmates had been. Santa Claus, you look like. Mary didn't answer. Around them, ladies lay on blankets, tanning while their kids ran wild. When the kids kicked and sand all over, Mary's mom yelled, stop that! Even strangers' kids she was mean to. I wish Pop was here, Mary said. He should be pie-eyed by now, her mom said. On Saturdays, Pop spent all day at Lenny's bar. Should have married Deb's mom, Mary thought. She loved Pop. He never picked on her. He even stuck her devil dogs when her mom hid them high in the cupboard out of Mary's reach. Mary stared out at the ocean, watched the waves rise and fall. She tried to block out her mom's voice, worse than the seagulls screeching above. When the voice finally died down, the snoring began. Thank God, Mary thought. Guess what? Her friends were back, without coffee or cones. Dizzy Deb all excited. Mary shushed them. The Beatles are here, Greta whispered. What? Mary said. Huddled together, the 4 girls inched away from Mary's sleeping mom. This man, Debbie said, told us they were here playing under the boardwalk. But we'd hear them. Mary looked over toward the boardwalk. There'd be a crowd. He said, Deb said, to come over now, before everybody else. In the distance, Mary heard Beatles music, low and tinny. Here comes the sun. Hear that? Deb said. Come on, he'll introduce us. He works for them, he says. I don't know, Mary said. Is he English? Sounds like a transistor radio to me, Maureen said suspiciously. Mary, Mary's mom wailed. Come on, Mary said. She ran toward the music. It wasn't far, but it felt like miles running through sand. She huffed and puffed like she'd die before she got there. Paul, she thought, if the Beatles were there, she'd be the first to meet him. Under the boardwalk, she stopped suddenly. Sour and damp it smelled down there. The music still sounded tinny, and it never got louder. Here comes the sun, the Beatles sang, but there was no sun under here. Deb, Mary said hoarsely, looking behind her. Greta, Nor, they weren't there. Hello, a male voice said, but Mary couldn't see anybody. Where's Paul? She asked, but deep down she knew none of the Beatles was here. Where are your friends? The voice got louder as the man got closer. Mary's stomach felt tight, and not just from running. She wanted to scream but couldn't. It was like she choked on sand. The man was tall, younger than Pop, and with no underwear on. Between long hairy legs was this thing, red and veiny, like it belonged inside his body. Mary couldn't take her eyes off it. In her mind, far off, she was all grown up on a bar stool at Lenny's, drinking like Pop. On the jukebox, music played, but not the Beatles. No Beatles, ever again. You look smashing, the man said, in that suit. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
That was really good.
Thank you.
Hello, Foster, welcome.
Glad to be here. Sorry I'm so late.
It's okay.
I think I've missed probably a lot of great writing.
There's more, and then there's the next one coming up, so hope you'll come back and read. Brad Rose is the author of 4 collections of poetry and flash fiction: Pink X-Ray, Detonations, and Momentary Turbulence. His new book of prose poems, No, Wait, I Can Explain, was released in August. God, do I love that title. Brad, you're up.
Thanks, Paul. Here is the actual book. No, wait, I can explain. I'm going to read 5 pieces tonight that are moderately short, if I can find them. The first one is called Lost Keys. I'm not sure whether I'm a dog person or a cat person. I guess it's 6 of one, 50 cents of the other. You can always ask the internet, even though there's one thing I'm totally opposed to: tsunamis. They shouldn't be taught in school. They're un-American. Yesterday, I was at the grocery store and I was wearing my best Sunday funeral shoes. At the self-checkout, the National Enquirer said that now is as good a time as any to buy a foreclosure. First thing I thought was, I don't like eggs, but I love the shells. My cousin Elaine, you know, the one who you can't tell if she's testing the drug she should be using or using the drug she should be testing, says she's not sure if she has an unconscious or a conscience. For the record, all the recent shoplifting charges against her were dropped. I told her, just because you hear the notes, Elaine, doesn't mean you own the music. Fortunately, I've got all my ducks in a row. I'm wearing both my backpack and my front pack. I wouldn't want to end up stranded in the parking lot outside the courthouse like I did last time, when that tornado plowed through and everyone's car was sucked up the funnel. The damage was so bad, metal beams twisted like licorice vines, downtown buildings shuffled like a deck of cards. The governor declared a 14-day state of emergency. I had a devil of a time finding my keys. The next one's called There's a Fix for That. The This was just in bending genres. Do you prefer adding or subtracting? Yeah, me too. Fortunately, I was raised by a circus family, so I got a head start. Some people think there is a science to it, but it's just really the elephant of surprise. Of course, it takes two to tango, but it's always great to get a compliment, especially when you don't have to pay for it. Yesterday, I was out back trying to milk the drunken snakes. No, not the poisonous ones. Their colors are too vengeful. Normally, I like to collect secrets, but since this latest labor shortage, all the high-pitched accidental savagery, it's been nearly impossible for me to communicate with other life forms. Heck, I can hardly read my own handwriting. Ms. Molotov, my wrestling coach, says I should stop worrying. There's nothing to fear but life itself. She should know she purchased her last online husband from Amazon Prime. Her hair is symmetrical as a near drowning, and she smells of bargain basement high octane. I think I love her. Whenever we drive in my low slung bagatelle with the top down and the music on, she thinks I'm short, fair, and handsome. Saturday, as we took a spin, I told her, at least I'm not a danger to myself or anyone I know. She squinted into the middle distance, reached into her purse for a lily-colored handgun, and purred, turn up the volume, Preston, drive faster. The next piece is each and every one. Barbed wire cloud, wind like rattling chains. It's just another day on Shotgun Avenue. So I wander around in a fairly straight line, wondering at which end are endless things endless. I'm always busy, always going somewhere, even when I'm talking out loud to myself. My arms dealer, Mr. Nails, says you can only remember your dreams if you wake up. Ever since the open heart surgery, his heart seems to be in the right place. As he leans in close to me and hands me this week's shipment, I detect a tight, burnt smell of just fired gunpowder. He says, Walton, every death is a tragedy, even the comic ones. I ask myself, is there a Jesus for every planet? This is called Nicest Possible Way. Excuse me. Spent the morning polluting the internet. With all due respect, I'm untrustworthy, even under oath. I'm a big proponent of whataboutism, especially when it's reciprocal. Now I'm in my bulletproof automobile driving over to Juniper's. People say she's not that dangerous. Even though things are looking serious between us, we're just friends. If you're not accelerating, you're decelerating. It's a peach of a day. The sun is bright and bright as a broken yoke. The wind is neat as hospital corners. The latest statistics say that about 500 people a year die after being accidentally shot. That's better than staying home and petting the furniture, in the nicest possible way, of course. And this one's very short. It's called Dolls. Over the years, my house grew to be as big as a house. It's not an either-or question. Needless to say, there's safety in numbers and letters. Yesterday, Margine asked me, are you as disappointed in baggy, slouchy trousers as I am? Then it rained. I drove out to the doll cemetery, you know, the one by the lake. Fortunately, there were no survivors. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Sarah Sarai has published 2 to 3 poetry collections, depending on how you reckon, and a bunch of short stories. Sarah, that's a great bio. You're up.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. Well, of course, I'll drink some of my German water. It's actually Austrian. So I don't know what happened all of a sudden. So we're in Southern California now, all of us. Why Boys Swear. Jacaranda Blossom Elementary School was a collection of low, tidy bungalows. Its classroom smelled good to Princess, who thought the shadows on the linoleum floor were like Peter Pan's, like something she could lift and sew onto the trees, windows, desks. In New York, shadows turned to winter and snow, to ice sheeting a pond, to dark and threatening skies. In California, shadows were like sheets and pillows blowing on a clothesline. So this afternoon, Petey beat his chest as if his hands were silly putty. Princess felt good that her friends were her friends. Yup, yup, and yupper. She and Petey and Goldie were walking home together this afternoon and might be heading to Petey's house. Their teacher, Mrs. Lesters, outlined a full slate, including work on capital letters, Arabic numbers, colored paper and scissors, workbooks, and reading groups, one thing after another. Not much taller than her students, she wore the loose clothing of a woman who'd given birth in the past year. Black flats, an antique locket around her neck. Mid-morning, she awarded Goldie a gold star for her perfect spelling test. "It's a Goldie star," Petey called out. The class laughed, and he slapped his hands together and lifted them above his head. "Fucking shitty good." Mrs. Lesters raised her even eyebrows. She rubbed her nail on a piece of yellow chalk. "I'll talk to you at lunch, Petey." "Ah," he turned red. Sammy Goggin mimicked Petey. "Ah, ah." Rose and Sherry Hall joined in. "Ah." Mrs. Lesters was relieved because the class could have picked up on Petey's shitting fucker, and that it would have taken a power plant of energy to quiet them. She crossed her arms and winced. Her breasts were still tender. She imagined her sweet baby Laura and hoped she wasn't howling in the crib while her mother-in-law had a smoke out front. Princess observed Mrs. Lester's relief, followed by her private dip into sadness, and suddenly felt sad herself. "If Goldie gets a golden star," she distracted Mrs. Lesters. "Does Princess get a crown?" "Yes," Mrs. Lesters was no longer sad. "You'll get a crown." What do I get? What do I get? What do I get?" begged Sammy, Rose, and Sherry. The lunch bell rang and the class scattered. Petey tried to skedaddle with everyone, but Mrs. Lesters called to him and gestured to the front desk in the middle row. "I'm sorry, just for a few minutes." A ray of light squeezed between the blinds and danced on her auburn hair. Petey wondered if she was from a planet far away. She walked behind her desk, the standard scruffed wood fare of grammar school teachers, and sat. "Now, how do you think we're going to decorate that blackboard?" No teacher had asked Petey for his advice before. His mother Agnes might ask, "What do you think we could scramble together for supper, my son?" And his father might inquire if Petey was happy as he wished him a good night. But other than that, no adult asked his opinion on anything. His mind began to spin with images of skulls and crossbones, baseballs and bats. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to speak yet, and noticed Mrs. Lesters was no longer smiling. "I have an idea." She looked directly into his eyes. He was terrified and thrilled. "How about you stay after school today and fill the board with these words? I will not swear. It is not polite. I don't know how to spell polite. Mrs. Lester said she'd teach you. You do this for me, Petey, and I promise you the following." Sounds of a tetherball banging around a metal pole made him miserable. "I'll do it. Wait until I make my offer." He gulped. "Promise one is that I will erase it so the class won't see it tomorrow." He nodded so energetically she almost laughed. "And two, I promise, and I won't tell your mother." He jumped up and slapped his hand over his heart. Mrs. Lesters worried he'd bruised himself. "Of course you can't swear again. Not here." She gestured in a circle to include the entire classroom. "You know, Petey, The tone of her voice became less officious. All of this could be taught in a few years. The reading, the writing, the arithmetic, but you're here to be socialized. I'm just learning how to handle a PDF, I guess. He frowned. She gestured never mind with her hands. Her observations of the purpose of education were best kept to herself anyway. Do we have a deal? She sent him off to eat his lunch. She didn't make me go to the principal's office, Petey told Goldie and Princess as lunch ended, and they scattered back like migrating birds into the classroom. So she taught himself. You guys want to come over tomorrow instead of today? He spent his free time after school with some chalk, the board, and Mrs. Lester's. How is your movie? Marta asked that night as she brushed her hair with her prized natural bristle hairbrush. Princess stopped buttoning her pajama top. Huh? Weren't you seeing a film strip in your class? Didn't you tell me that? Marta couldn't believe how easily her little sister could forget things. Princess slapped her forehead. Marta studied Princess's pajamas, buttoned so the front didn't line up, the bottoms pulled high on her torso. You're really not dumb, you know. Princess felt a flush creep over her neck and face. I'm not? There was a rap on the door. Daughters number 2 and 3 getting ready for bed? Yes, Pop, Princess called. Come in. Herb slowly pushed open the door. He held the glass of scotch and rattled the ice cubes. Marta says I'm not dumb, she announced. He studied both daughters. Don't believe everything you hear, Princess. He walked out. Her eyes narrowed. The film machine wasn't working. She rebuttoned her pajamas and snuggled into her bed. So we'll see it tomorrow. Marta pulled down the sheets, her sheets, on or off. She meant the light. I'm going to do my ablutions. Ablutions, ablutions, ablutions. Marta fussed with the perfumes and equestrian paraphernalia on her dresser top. Well, they never had been allowed to use nightlights. No Bing was permitted to be afraid of the dark. On, Princess mumbled, adding that she'd still be awake when Marta returned. She wasn't. Class ended at 12:30 the following day, so the faculty could attend a state-mandated meeting, but there was time for the film strip in the morning. Mrs. Lester prepped them. So who can tell me what country the American revolutionaries were fighting? Spain? Petey was thinking of Columbus. Please raise your hand and I'll call on you. They had a king, Rose Armitage said. That's stupid, Bobby Finkelstein whispered to Petey. Princess clamped her left hand under her right bicep to push her hand higher and higher. Goldie, Mrs. Lester's pointed. England. Goldie was triumphant. Princess looked around, hoping her classmates knew she also had the right answer. Mrs. Lester's leaned in her direction. Princess, name 2 American patriots. 2. George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, Princess spit out, adding, a penny saved is a penny earned. Well, there you go, kid. Bobby Finkelstein lowered the shades. One snapped and rolled up. Petey leapt out of his seat and the 2 boys pulled on it together. Petey volunteered to hold it down during the film, and Mrs. Lester said, okay, we'll get the janitor in here after school. Rose turned off the lights. When Princess, who'd seen the educational film on Patrick Henry in New York and knew an American quotation when she heard it, stood on her desk in the darkened classroom to declaim Henry's rousing words, give me liberty or give me death, along with Mr. Henry, Mrs. Lesters quietly reminded her that she was to calm down, not up. Princess, Mrs. Lester's voice reminded Princess of cucumbers Florine made her slice for a salad, cool, crisp, and refreshing. Yeah, Princess. Petey was thrilled when he wasn't the one in trouble. Rose turned on the lights as the film wound to its final, the end. Goldie placed her pencil perpendicular to her notebook. Now remember, 3A students, Mrs. Lester said, I want the 5 questions about Patrick Henry answered with a complete sentence. That's a complete sentence to the very best of your ability. A complete sentence starts with a capital letter, Rose offered with glowing satisfaction. And it ends with a comma, no, a period, no, a comma. Sammy hoped both answers were right. Petey, is it a comma or a period? He looked at Sammy, who drew a comma in the air. Princess sat quietly with her hands grasped together on her desk and thought, Petey, it's a period, Petey. A period, Mrs. Lesters? The class applauded. Petey looked like he would die of pride and then go through a second death over his shame at dying from pride. And thank you, Princess Bing, for calming yourself down. Princess also swelled. It's nice to have an American history enthusiast. That's fucking great. Sounds of many chairs scraping along the floor, save Petey. A few days after her family settled into their San Fernando Valley tract house, Princess asked her mother, why do boys swear so much? Florine was scrubbing tuna and noodles that had baked onto a casserole dish. Wind blew from Florine's mouth. Her eyes darkened and suds splashed from the sink to the counter. They think it makes them men. She scrubbed more. Petey Princess pressed her ear on Florine's back, curious what she'd hear. Swung her arms around her mother for a hug. Accepted Florine's damp pats and wondered if Petey thought he was a man. She doubted it.
Thank you, Sarah. Poor Petey. Niles Reddick is the author of a novel, 2 collections, and a novella. His work has been featured in over 450 publications, including the Saturday Evening Post, Piff, New Reader Magazine, Fourth Magazine, Citron Review, and the Boston Literary Magazine. He is 3-time Pushcart and 2-time Best Micro nominee and works for the University of Memphis. His newest flash collection, If Not For You, is forthcoming by Big Table Publishing. Niles.
Hey, thanks, Paul. And Paul Robbins said to give you a hug. I don't know how to do that on Zoom, but she just sent me a message a minute ago.
Could you tell me who it's from?
Robin Stratton. Yeah.
I feel it.
So, okay. This story is called Bitten. It was inspired by my recent encounter when I was bitten by a snake. And so I turned this into a story. This is more fiction, but anyway, Bitten. It's about 1,000 words. I went inside the cool house, sat in the leather chair, watched the news, and drank iced tea. After a few minutes, the sweat on my t-shirt dried, and I figured I needed to finish trimming the widow's hedges across the street. I don't know why I had volunteered. Maybe it was because I felt guilty for not doing more when her husband died. We'd taken a bucket of KFC with the trimmings to her house and sent a card. Earlier, when we were both outside, I asked her how she was doing. She'd responded that she was hanging on as best she could, and I nodded. That's when I volunteered. I was thankful the wasps that swarmed out of her holly didn't sting me when I trimmed the shoots jetting upward toward her gutters. And by the time I took a break, I had plenty of other scrapes and cuts. My ankle hurt. I lifted it and noticed 2 perfectly spaced puncture wounds. A couple of blood droplets had dried, and a memory swirled. I had been bitten in the hand by a non-venomous snake when I was 7, and I didn't recall how it felt or how it looked. That had been 40 years ago. I was concerned. If I had been bitten by a snake in the widow's landscaping, then it was sudden, so quick, in fact, that I hadn't noticed. If I had been bitten by a venomous snake, I think I would have experienced some symptoms. and given at least 2 or 3 hours had passed with no symptoms, I assumed I'd be okay. If I had seen the snake and had not been bitten, I would have run as best I could in my flip-flops across the yard back to my house where iced tea was waiting. If I had seen the snake that bit me, I would have had a heart attack on the spot, found myself in the tunnel, and moved toward the light where I imagined St. Peter looked like the old Grail Knight in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and might have said, you know, we didn't have a choice but to wear sandals back in my day. You had a choice and chose flip-flops. You chose poorly. I imagine my life review would have included my first snake bite. I was in 2nd grade and we were instructed to bring something to school for show and tell. The afternoon before, I was playing with my Tonka dump truck and I jumped back when I saw the small oak snake coiled in the bed. I found the mesh cricket tube we used for fishing. The truck dumped him in and I snapped the tin lid shut. I sat it outside on the stoop and shared with my mom, who said, you aren't going to take a snake to school. Why not? How do you know it's not a venomous snake? I didn't hear it rattle. Rattlesnakes aren't the only venomous snakes around here. Dump it out and figure out what else you can take. Okay, I said, but decided to watch Batman instead, the original Batman with Adam West. The next morning, my snake was still in the cricket container and I carried it by the lid's rope. I put the cricket container behind my books under my desk and didn't tell anyone. When it was my turn and the teacher asked what I brought, I pulled the cricket container and walked to the front of the room. Looks like you have a fish bait container. That's right, and I have a snake trapped in here. The class oohed and awed as I shook it, and they saw the outstretched snake trying to slither its way through the metal mesh. I walked over to the front row where Becky sat and shook it at her. She screamed and began to cry. Okay, thank you, that's enough. Let's take this to the principal's office. The teacher said something to the principal and then went back to class. Now let's see, what have you got here? Principal Becker asked. I found him in my Tonka truck bed. You know, oak snakes eat all sorts of varmints. Let's take him out and let him go in the woods. He's probably hungry. When I opened the lid, the snake struck me in the palm of my hand. Ow! The snake then slithered and disappeared into the leaves and straw at the edge of the school's mowed property. You'll be okay. Let's wipe it with some alcohol, paint some mercurochrome on it, and put a bandage on there. I'll call your mom and let her know. Does it hurt? No, I said. I guess he didn't appreciate being trapped. Mr. Becker was very kind, patted my head and said, I bet your classmates will talk about how cool your show and tell was. If he called my mom, she never said anything about it. Maybe he comforted her in the call, told her I was fine, just being a boy. I Googled images of snake bites and the images on my phone matched my bite. I read about non-venomous bites and venomous bites. I realized it could have been either type of snake, but if it had been a venomous snake, then the bite would have been what is called a dry bite, one in which a venomous snake that doesn't inject venom. Either way, 2 bites were enough to last my lifetime. I heaved out of the chair, slipped my feet into my flip-flops and walked back across the street, careful not to touch the poison ivy draping her hedges and scanning the beds to avoid the snake as if he was still there. That night, I rubbed some antibiotic ointment on the bite, put a Band-Aid over the area. I promised my wife I'd wear the rubber boots in the future, not flip-flops. In the middle of the night, one of my feet touched the other and I flew out of bed. What's wrong? Did you hear something? No, my feet touched and I thought it might be a snake. If you wake me up again, you won't have to worry about a snake, she said. Thank you.
Thank you, Niles. Well, that concludes the main part of our evening. I don't know if anybody came to read at the open mic.
I could do one small piece if there's time.
Okay, you got up to 5 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm not going to do one of mine. I'm going to do one of my favorites. And it's because I had a chance to talk with you, Paul, in the beginning. I'm sorry, I think I called you John, but I was a little nervous. I was early and I wasn't expecting you to pop up. So anyway, you were in the Air Force, and so you might appreciate this. You might even know it. It's called Death of the Ball Turret Gunner by Randall Jarrell.
Oh,
What? Is that good?
it's good. Yeah.
Okay. From my mother's sleep, I fell into the state, and I hunched in its belly till my wet fur froze. 6 miles from earth, loosed from my dream of life, I woke to black flak and the nightmare fighters. When I died, they washed me out of the turret with a hose.
Thank you.
Pretty good, isn't it? It's pretty amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. It was great. I hope to come the next time. You say you do it every month?
Every month,
Awesome.
usually the first Friday of the month.
Okay. That's not this isn't the first Friday, is it, or is it?
No, because we have a holiday,
Right.
long weekend.
So it will be the first Friday in October.
It will be.
Okay. Well, I hope to be here. This was great.
Okay. Well,
Almost like the real thing. Not quite, but it's a new world.
just email me that you're going to read or you want to read.
Sure. I'd love to.
Okay.
Okay.
Paul at paulbeckman.com.
Okay.
Meg is a Yellow Mama poet. We're all in the same family.
Oh my gosh. You're taking over.
Meg and Paul and Bernice and Niles and Brad.
A lot of shirt tail cousins and whatever.
Sandra. Yeah. And I hope the rest of you
We
and
got the
Zibby.
corner on this.
Well, I can tell Niles and Paul that I actually hugged Robin Stratton just last week up in
Oh, wow.
Novato, California. First time we'd been together in person in about a year or so. It was really nice. She's glowing. As
She's a
somebody
nice lady. Good.
Yeah.
She published my second book.
Wow.
Yeah, she did one of my books too. And you don't look like Dawn.
This is not recorded, right?
It is
No.
being recorded.
Thank you all. Paul, thank you so much. You got one for us, Paul, before we go?
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Yeah,
please
yeah,
read.
Paul.
Paul. Come on, close the show, Paul.
I can do
There's a
that.
mic
with the
waiting
button.
to be dropped.
By the way, somebody read The Marriage. I've been in quite a number of Pierce Lush's anthologies. This is the heaviest one I've ever seen. This. And there's a lot of good work in here. Okay. I will read you something that I'm actually going to read next week from Best Small Fictions. Before I do this, Foster, did you have an open mic story?
No, Paul, I'm just here to
There's
listen.
no pressure. I just.
I'm just here to listen.
Flat out. You cool?
I bow to you.
Oh, God, you're in trouble. This is called Writer's Jeopardy. Originally published in Bending Genres. Alex out of the hospital with his cancer diagnosis was standing holding the IV pole with one hand and maybe questions and answers in the other. I was one of 3 writers and back for my second day as returning champion. My mother was sitting in a chair off to the side with the spotlight on her. She had died of cancer a number of years earlier. Alex began by introducing my mother and asking her what brought her to the show. And she reached down and patted a large bamboo basket with a sign reading, "Gift basket." He asked her how she thought I did on the earlier show. She unwrapped a stick of blackjack gum, popped it in her mouth, and shrugged her answer back to Alex. Alex read off the headlines, and me being the reigning champion, I got to go first. "Alex, I'll take threats for 300. What is, I'll break every bone in your body?" Barb buzzed in. What did Paul's mother frequently say to him to show extreme displeasure? That was the right answer, and my mother glared at me as the audience applauded. "Alex, I'll take threats for 400. Tomas buzzed in. What is, for lying? I'll wash your mouth out with kosher soap. Again, the right answer, and they were coming from all the other writers and not me. "Alex, sarcasm for 600, please. If blank mother lets him jump off the bridge, does that mean I have to let you jump off too?" Tomas, lightning fast on the buzzer, said, "Who is Myron?" Right again, Tomas. "Alex, I'll take guilting for 1,000. Daily double, Tomas. Well, let's make it a true daily double, Alex. Tomas, this could be it for you. Folks, he's all in for $22,000. What is, I wish I were dead." My mother looked at me with a self-satisfied look as the audience applauded. Then the nurses came and escorted Alex out of the studio as the other writers went over and talked to my mother, who laughed along with them. My Aunt Libby drove onto the stage in her Volkswagen Beetle, and my mother materialized in her sister's passenger seat, and they drove off with my mother lighting up and blowing smoke rings to the applause of the audience.
Good, nice.
Just something cheerful for the end of the evening.
I think that sums it up pretty well.
I loved it.
Well, listen, thank you all for coming and sharing.
You.
And we got
Thank you
another
so
Beatle.
much.
Thank you, Paul.
You guys are the best.
See you next
Thanks for
month.
doing it, Paul.
Sorry I was late.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Paul.
Everyone was one. Thank you.
Bye all. Love you
Bye.
guys.
Good night.
Take care, everybody.
Love you guys so much.
Cindy, I'm glad you have a lot of friends.
All right, Cindy.
Foster.
Bye.